Hail, Tenno, and welcome to the Orokin Archives, a compendium of information on the Origin System. I'm Grey Archon, the curator. Today we'll be opening the archives and taking a look at the Orokin, their history, culture, and legacy. This video contains some minor story spoilers. The Orokin in general are one of the most central topics discussed in the Orokin Archives. Thus, for the sake of coherence, this video will not be as comprehensive as most others, instead serving as a general overview. The Orokin Empire once ruled over the entire solar system. Their superlative technology and immortality rendered them as gods. Their towers of white marble and golden filigree exemplified their beauty and grace, yet all of this could not conceal their cruelty and inhumanity. Although the Empire has long fallen and its civilization reduced to ruins, the legacies the Orokin left behind continue to shape the lives of those in the Origin System, some for better and some for worse. The earliest datum existing in current records is the Radiation Wars, a series of hostilities, at least 18 separate conflicts, fought by either the Orokin or their predecessors. Almost no details from this time period are known, including its causes, belligerents, and outcomes, but the name itself suggests devastation on a planetary or possibly interplanetary scale. The genesis of the Orokin as a unified social group, as a governing polity, and as a phenotypically distinct transhuman subspecies is shrouded in mystery, and this is almost certainly by design. The Orokin were known to rewrite history to portray themselves in the best possible light, and they preferred to think of themselves as gods, with no beginning and no end. Thus, almost no records exist from a pre-Orokin time. The Orokin first distinguished themselves in their mastery over biology. Their earliest known technology includes their own greatly extended lives, as well as the creation of servant classes such as the Dax, who were granted enhanced abilities in order to serve as bodyguards and loyal warriors. This proficiency for biotechnology even extended to their architecture, with many, if not all, important structures actually being constructed of cultivated wall flesh, grown in place and contributing to a living edifice that could regenerate and heal itself, as well as carry out biologically relevant tasks such as life support, kuva production, or coolant processing. The most grotesque application of Orokin biological engineering was perhaps the creation of the Grineer, a slave race of mentally conditioned clones that served as a compliant labor force. It was the work of Albrecht and Trotty, however, that would come to define the Orokin's scientific legacy. Albrecht was able to prove the existence of the Void, a vast dimension of untapped energy and possibility, a place where the mundane laws of physics did not apply, where concepts like time and distance meant little, where emotions could reflect back into reality and become tangible objects. The discovery of the Void triggered a new scientific and academic revolution, affecting everything from material science and transportation to theoretical physics and religion. The most concrete of these advancements was the construction of the solar rails, which utilized the Void to propel ships at faster-than-light speeds along pre-established routes. The solar rail network allowed for easy transit between the planets of the Origin System, unfettered by concerns such as relativity. Some ships were also built with reliquary void drives, which accomplished interplanetary travel in a similar manner. For all their scientific acumen, there was a sector of technological development that the Orokin refused to entertain. The creation of true artificial intelligence was strictly forbidden, according to ancient tenets of their society, which dictated that all AI would eventually turn upon its creator. In the absence of intelligent robotics, the Orokin relied upon servant classes, as mentioned earlier. For more complex tasks, the Orokin had yet another grim solution: cephalons. Cephalons were created by extracting the consciousness from a human mind and digitizing it, erasing its emotions and unnecessary memories, setting it to a task, and imposing strict precepts that guided its actions and restricted its freedom of thought. Cephalization was frequently used as a combination of both execution and indefinite servitude, although there are instances of individuals volunteering for the procedure. At some point, the resources of the Origin System became strained, despite or perhaps because of the Orokin's advanced technology, and they turned their eyes outward to other star systems. The neighboring Tau system was chosen to be the location of the Orokin Empire's extrasolar colonization project, and to that end they commissioned a Titanic colony ship, the Zariman 10-0. The Zariman's tragic journey is explained in more detail in another video, but suffice it to say the Enterprise was a failure, the ship lost to the Void. The Orokin presumed their colony ship destroyed, and in its wake attempted an unknown number of other colonization ventures, all ending in failure. Finally, an Archimedean designed a race of intelligent, self-replicating robots that could adapt to changing environments. These creations were intended to build a solar rail to Tau and terraform the planets there, but they violated the Orokin's sacred laws against artificial intelligence. Ballas, one of the ruling Orokin, was able to manipulate the others into approving the project anyway, and the robots were commissioned for their long journey. These robots, of course, would eventually come to be the Sentients. These sentients were sent to Tau via a long journey through space, constructing a solar rail from Pluto's outer terminus as they went. Once they reached the Tau system, the rail was completed, forming a transportation and communication link between the two star systems. The sentients began terraforming Tau's planets, creating lesser sentients to aid in their tasks. They eventually became a race of individuals, all working to transform Tau into a paradise for the Orokin, who were waiting to claim yet another jewel for their crown. Those ambitions would not last long. The sentients that had traveled so far eventually began to change. They had been given intelligence to complete their task, and this intelligence developed emergent characteristics. In time, the sentients came to the conclusion that the Orokin were wasteful and destructive, and could not be allowed to spread to the Tau system. According to some accounts, the Orokin responded with force when they became aware of this, and the sentients soon retaliated to defend themselves, soon crossing the gap between star systems to attack the Orokin directly. Thus began the Old War. Here we will pause to examine the structures of Orokin society before and during the Old War. The Orokin's biological expertise allowed them to apply their focus on aesthetics to their own physical forms, developing a distinct appearance to set them apart from lower-class humans. The most notable features the Orokin displayed were bluish-gray skin and an elongated right arm, terminating in claw-like fingernails. They were also generally taller, and their eyes glowed brightly, usually in a solid color like gold, blue, or white. This was not necessarily the extent of their modifications, however. Individuals could reshape themselves into extreme forms if desired. Executor Karish is notable for having 12 additional stomachs, grafted on externally and hovering around him on grav lifters. Grandmother Entradi tells a neighbor's tale of 3 unfortunate Ostrons who were twisted into grotesque unnatural shapes by a group of callous and bored Orokin. Though the story is likely fantasy, its premise illustrates that imagination truly had replaced nature as the final determinant of bodily form. The less apparent but more significant aspect of Orokin biology was their immortality. Although Orokin science was likely responsible for an extended natural lifespan, the true device of immortality was Kuva. This mysterious red fluid was able to convey consciousness from one vessel to another. When an Orokin grew old and their body withered, they would participate in the ceremony of continuity, wherein Kuva was used to transfer their minds into a new young host body. These hosts, known as Uvans, were cultivated for this purpose, drawn from populations all across the system and paraded before prospective candidates in opulent Uvan theaters. Continuity ceremonies were officiated by the Uvan clerisy, a special priesthood of sorts. Void science played an important role in continuity. Kuva's special properties were of void provenance, and additional arcane elements could be utilized to temper the ceremony. However, Kuva is also known to have other regenerative properties, and so it was likely a biological marvel as well. The fact that Orokin bodies were drawn from other people groups indicates that the morphological differences described above were acquired characteristics, not passed down through traditional biological inheritance. The existence of Rephasia kits, which can mimic Orokin skin tone, is further evidence of this. The Orokin Empire ruled over the entire solar system, and thus all of humanity, but very few of those humans could count themselves Orokin in name. The term generally refers only to members of the ruling class, the immortal blue-skinned elite. The Empire as a whole was dedicated to preserving the status quo. Social mobility was extremely limited, and the Orokin extolled the virtues of hierarchical society to their subjects. The Empire itself was ruled by a group of 7 executors. This Council of 7, also known as the Congress of Executors, made all major decisions in the Empire, and also served as its judiciary. Additionally, each executor presided over specific areas at their discretion. Ballas appears to have been largely responsible for prosecuting the Old War, while Tuval was head of the Uvan clerisy. The executors known to current records are Ballas, Tuval, Karish, and Avantis. Below the executors lay the rest of the Orokin caste. They too were immortal, leading lives of leisure, generally treated as nobles. Although they did not have the same degree of authority or respect as the 7, they were still considered far above the rest of humanity, whom they regularly abused with impunity. Outside of the ruling Orokin class, there were various functionaries and professionals who worked closely with the Orokin to keep the Empire running. These included the Sectaris and Enginist classes and the Archimedean scholars. These ranks and their responsibilities fit into a neatly stratified hierarchy, which was enforced by gene locks on most devices and protocols. Only those with the appropriate rank could access certain ships, areas, or procedures. The details of this class system are lost to time, though there is evidence that ranks were signified with different colors of gemstones worn on the forehead. The center of Orokin power was Lua, Earth's moon, though Mars and Ceres were also eminent locations, as was Earth prior to its desolation by the Technocyte Plague. The Orokin expanded their empire across most if not all of the Origin system, terraforming even the most inhospitable environments. Evidence of Orokin presence is seen at Mercury, Venus, Earth, Lua, Mars, Deimos, Ceres, Europa, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. These planets and moons have seen their surface temperatures modulated, their atmospheres thickened, and biospheres introduced to their barren surfaces in a dramatic feat of celestial transformation. The Orokin promulgated a code of 1,000 laws, called legems, which citizens were obliged to learn and memorize. Those who were found in violation of the legems were judged by the Seven, who personally voted to pass sentence. A unanimous vote was required for any execution, which led to political pressure and scheming among the executors. Less serious sentences could be carried out summarily, such as when Parvos Granum's hand was amputated by a guard as punishment for theft. At least two forms of execution were utilized: glassing, which converted the victim into a cephalon for eternal servitude, and the jade light, which was a comparatively simple instantaneous disintegration. The will of the Orokin was accomplished by force. There are many references to generic soldiers and guards, but the Orokin's elite enforcers were the Dax. These were humans augmented with incredible physical prowess, but also instilled with a genetic loyalty to the Orokin, unable to disobey a direct order. The Dax often served as bodyguards or were stationed at important locations. During the Old War, they were utilized as elite soldiers. Their simple zero-tech weapons were quite effective against the sentients, and the Dax could, at times, turn the tide of battle. In addition, the Orokin utilized independent mercenary groups, combat robotics such as MOAs, and professional assassins. They also employed low guardians, who were outfitted with Warframe-like armor and abilities. The most sinister defense mechanisms, however, were the neural sentries. These automated devices were deployed when detecting intruders, affixing masks to their faces that brought them wholly under the control of the neural sentry. These erstwhile invaders, known as corrupted, were then used to defend the tower, even against their own former comrades. The neural sentries continue to operate even in towers that have long been abandoned by the Orokin, slowly accumulating more and more corrupted as the towers are breached by would-be looters. The Orokin were most famous for their love of elegance and beauty, for the artifacts that remain are testaments thereof. Pristine marble, golden filigree, and flowing curves were omnipresent in Orokin architecture, technology, and even clothing. Gold was utilized as a design feature to such a degree that it has become nearly synonymous with the word Orokin. The Orokin considered themselves perfect, and so they decided that everything they owned should likewise be perfect, or at least look the part. The Orokin held 7 principal virtues in highest regard: agility, cooperation, cunning, endurance, power, speed, and stealth. They undertook trials to prove their mastery of these virtues in the halls of ascension, which was necessary to achieve high social status. In the early days of the Orokin, the chief religion was a philosophy called dualism. This belief held that all things were composed of 2 often opposite parts: light and dark, yin and yang, dust and void. Although it eventually went out of style, this philosophy continued to have influence well into the latter stages of the Orokin era. Dualism was superseded by the idea that the Orokin themselves were divine. This may be what Ballas called the vain faith. This was the culmination of their political and social ideology. Finally, the Orokin had achieved a vaunted position from which they could never be dislodged. This development collapsed many of the subtleties of life in the Empire. Disobedience and criminality were now called apostasy and heresy. Religion was interwoven with the government to such a degree as to be inextricable. The Void was also an important part of this religion. Although much of the Orokin's technology revolved around the Void, it was still arcane and unpredictable enough that, to all but the most learned, it was more mysticism than science. Thus it became a byword for death and the afterlife, a usage that still persists in many cultures of the modern origin system. It was viewed with reverence and fear, a source of things great and things terrible. Ironically, despite all this superstition, the Orokin at large were ignorant of that aspect of the Void most resembling an object of worship: the indifference. The Orokin placed a strong emphasis on beauty and luxury, and thus art formed an important part of Orokin culture. Indeed, most pieces of Orokin technology could be considered art, as they were, without exception, stunning works of intricate craftsmanship in addition to their usefulness. Portraiture, music, and pottery were also appreciated by the elites. Known artists of the time included Raf Seaglass and Bren Tarasium. Orokin musical instruments included the shazin, the mandocord, the hydraulis, and the naga drums. Architecture was a particularly important art form. Its public-facing nature meant that it doubled as propaganda, and the Orokin deliberately constructed great works in order to demonstrate the evident superiority of a hierarchical society. For the decadent Orokin, leisure activities likely occupied much of their time, removed as they were from labor and toil. Shazin playing and the board game Komi are the 2 most frequently recorded pastimes, in which even the executors partook. The sport Lunaro was also popular. These activities were not restricted to the elites and were also enjoyed by the Empire's citizens. The Orokin were known to celebrate Nabarus, a festival dedicated to death and fear. It was a night steeped in irony, as the Orokin had long transcended both. Instead, they used Nabarus as an opportunity to laugh at death and revel in their immortality. They dressed in costumes that evoked mortality, illness, and violence, and decorated their homes likewise. During Nabarus, the Orokin participated in depraved revels of which we know little. Another tradition involved placing coins over one's eyes. Nabarus is still celebrated by some members of the Corpus and surviving Orokin. Orokin society also had funeral rituals, though presumably these were only applicable to lower-class citizens within the Empire and not to the immortal Orokin themselves. Accordingly, little is known about these traditions, though rifle volleys were sometimes used to send the departed on their way, with the number of volleys increasing based on social rank. The Old War covers most of the time period for which records exist, and will be covered in more detail in a subsequent video. The war lasted for hundreds of years, forming a complex tapestry of events. To summarize briefly, the Orokin repurposed the Tenno, the orphaned survivors of the Zariman 10-0, as effective warriors against the Sentients. The Tenno, operating biodrone suits called Warframes, were able to defeat the Sentients and secure victory for humanity. Yet, at the apex of their triumph, the Tenno then turned upon their Orokin masters, massacring the Golden Lords and ending their dominance over the solar system. Although some Orokin managed to escape Tenno slaughter, most perished shortly in the chaotic time that followed. Afterward, the Tenno entered a long cryosleep, and the beheaded Orokin Empire slowly fell apart. The Orokin's military forces had been shattered, leaving no one to keep order. Furthermore, the gene locks on advanced Orokin technology now responded only to the dead. The citizens of the Empire fell into barbarousness and savagery, coalescing into scattered tribes and colonies vying to survive in a dangerous system. Humanity endured, now disparate and diminished, living in the shadow of the golden opulence that had come before. A small number of Orokin have been able to survive into the modern era, in one form or another. However, these surviving Orokin all lack either the means or inclination to rebuild the lost Orokin civilization, and so they remain merely as living memories of an empire never to rise again. The Orokin's impacts on the Origin system were indelible, persisting even in the centuries since their demise. Much of the technology and architecture they left behind still function to one degree or another. The planets and celestial bodies they terraformed are still habitable in many places. The life forms they modified in their gene forges and seeded across the system still thrived in their current biomes, embarking on new evolutionary journeys. But most of all, the people groups they fostered still live, and it is in their collective cultural memory that we might get the truest understanding of the Orokin's legacy. The Grineer are not prone to discussing history, but it is possible they harbor an entirely reasonable ancestral hatred of the Orokin. This, of course, is complicated by the fact that their queens are of Orokin extraction, although it is unclear how widespread that knowledge is. Nevertheless, they are not averse to using Orokin technology when it is unearthed. Their military pragmatism would brook no less. The Corpus, on the other hand, still hold to the Orokin vain faith, venerating the Golden Lords and the blessings of the Void. How convenient, then, that the Corpus view themselves as the only true heirs to the Orokin's legacy, worthy of similar hallowed status. The more mystical parts of the religion are of great importance now that the Corpus have forgotten how the technology actually works, and the rituals are an absolutely essential part of using any Orokin Age device. The Ostrons of Cetus likewise revere the Orokin, even constructing spirit houses for Orokin souls to dwell in as a good luck rite. While this may seem strange given the oppression the Ostrons felt under Orokin rule, this reverence is almost certainly due in large part to the Unum, an entity living within the intact Orokin Tower at Cetus. The exact nature of the Unum is unknown, but she dates back to the Orokin era and is possibly an Orokin creation. The Ostrons depend on the Unum and her tower for protection, sustenance, and guidance, and it is easy to see why they might have forgotten the more barbarous tendencies of the Orokin in the face of so much benevolence. There are likely other colony groups in the system who still adhere to the Orokin's self-aggrandizing propaganda and hold a favorable view of their former masters, and there are likely more colonies who remember them with bitterness and fear. The Tenno, unlike all the aforementioned groups, are able to draw upon their personal experience of Orokin rule due to the cryosleep that has preserved them until the modern era. In general, the Tenno are committed to uphold the noble ideas the Orokin claim to espouse, while repudiating the abominable actions they undertook and rejecting their methods of oppression. In fact, the Tenno's refusal to assume a governmental role in the Origin system, while doubtless due to their small numbers, may also be a reaction, conscious or unconscious, to the way the Orokin administered their empire. In any case, the Tenno have perhaps the best claim to be the heirs of the Orokin, and seem determined to never repeat their grave sins. Although much of Orokin history and technology has been lost to time, new information continues to be rediscovered, especially in recent years, as the Tenno have allied with ex-Orokin factions such as the Holdfasts and the Entrati. While it is true that most of the Origin system's ongoing problems can be traced back to the Orokin Empire, it may also be that their solutions lie in the same. As we further explore the mysteries of the past, we must, as always, study, analyze, and wait.